The crimson sands of Kepler 442b stretched endlessly beneath the twin suns, their harsh light casting long shadows across the battlefield. Commander Zara Chun stood atop the makeshift command bunker, her weathered combat armor reflecting the alien landscape's eerie glow. The human settlement of New Terra had been under siege for 3 weeks, and today would determine whether humanity's first colony beyond the solar system would survive. The Vorthek Empire had come expecting easy prey. Their intelligence reports painted humans as a recently spacefaring species, barely capable of interstellar travel, let alone warfare. They had conquered 17 civilizations in the past century, each falling within days of first contact. Earth's colony was supposed to be a simple harvesting operation for resources and slave labor. Zara's tactical display flickered with incoming data from her reconnaissance drones. The enemy force was massive beyond anything the colonists had faced before. 300,000 Vorthek warriors, their chitinous exoskeletons gleaming like black metal in the sunlight. These weren't the regular troops they had fought off in previous skirmishes. These were the Crimson Claw Battalion, the Empire's most elite fighting force, genetically enhanced super soldiers who had never known defeat. Commander. Incoming transmission from the Vorthek flagship, reported Lieutenant Santos, his voice tense through the COM system. They're demanding our immediate surrender. Zara's lips curved into a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. Put them through. The holographic display shimmered to life, revealing War Prime Thexkar, a towering Vorthek warrior whose ceremonial scars marked him as a veteran of countless campaigns. His 4 arms were crossed in a display of dominance, each hand capable of crushing human bones like twigs. Behind him, rows of his elite warriors stood in perfect formation, their bioluminescent war paint pulsing with anticipation. Human female, Thexkar's voice was a guttural rasp, translated through universal communication protocols. You lead this pathetic settlement, yes? I am War Prime Thexkar of the Crimson Claw. We have come to claim this world for the Empire. Surrender now, and perhaps some of your kind will survive as laborers? Zara studied the alien commander for a moment, noting the confidence radiating from every gesture. The way his troops stood ready for what they clearly expected to be a massacre. She had seen that look before, in the eyes of enemies who thought they understood what they were facing. They were always wrong. Well, Prime Thexkar, she replied, her voice steady and calm. I am Commander Zara Chun of the New Terra Defense Force. I've reviewed your service record and I must admit, it's impressive. 17 conquered worlds, over 2 million enemy casualties, 0 defeats. Quite the reputation. The alien's chest swelled with pride at the acknowledgement of his achievements. Then you understand the futility of resistance. Surrender now and spare your people unnecessary suffering. Zara's expression remained neutral, but something dangerous flickered in her eyes. Here's the thing, War Prime. Those 17 civilizations you conquered, they were all peaceful species. Philosophers, scientists, artists, traders, none of them had ever fought a real war. She paused, letting the words sink in. Humans are different. Thexkar's mandibles clicked in what passed for Vorthek laughter. Your bravado is admirable but pointless. We bring 300,000 of our finest warriors. What do you have? A few thousand colonists playing at being soldiers? We have something you've never encountered before, Zara replied, her smile widening slightly. We have a species that has spent its entire evolutionary history perfecting the art of killing each other. Every major breakthrough in human technology has been driven by warfare. We fought with sticks and stones, bronze and iron, gunpowder and nuclear fire. We've turned science into an engine of destruction so efficient that we nearly destroyed ourselves multiple times. The Vorthek commander's confidence flickered for just a moment. Something in the human female's tone was unsettling, a cold certainty that spoke of intimate knowledge of violence. Your people have been conquerors for a century, Zara continued. My people have been warriors for 100,000 years. We've fought in jungles and deserts and frozen wastelands and burning cities. We've developed tactics and strategies in conflicts that lasted decades. When we finally reached the stars, we didn't leave our knowledge of war behind. We refined it. The tactical display behind her showed the human defensive positions, a complex network of fortifications that seemed almost organic in their design. What the Vorthek couldn't see were the hundreds of hidden bunkers, the weapon caches buried beneath the sand, the kill zones carefully mapped and pre-targeted. "War Prime," Zara said, her voice taking on an almost conversational tone. "Before you begin your assault, I want to offer you some advice. You're going to want to bring more medics." Vexkar's four eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, human?" "Your casualties are going to be unlike anything you've experienced before. See those other civilizations you conquered? They fought to defend their homes, their families. Noble, but ultimately defensive thinking." Zara's smile became predatory. "Humans don't just fight to defend. We fight to win. And when we fight to win, we don't stop until our enemies are completely, utterly destroyed." The alien commander's bioluminescent patterns shifted to an angry red. "Enough of this psychological warfare. You have 1 hour to surrender, or we will take your colony by force." "War Prime," Zara called out as the transmission was about to end. "One more thing. Those medical supplies you're going to need, you might want to start preparing them now. Because in about 6 hours, you're going to discover why humans are the only species that makes war an art form." The transmission cut off, leaving the command center in tense silence. Lieutenant Santos stared at his commander. "Ma'am, with respect, they outnumber us 60-1. How are we going to survive this?" Zara turned away from the display, her expression hardening into the mask of a veteran warrior. "Santos, send the signal to all defensive positions. Implement Protocol Omega, and send a message to Earth Command. Tell them the Vorthik Empire just made their biggest mistake." Outside, the alien army began its advance, confident in their inevitable victory. They had no idea they were about to encounter something that would become legend throughout the galaxy. A human military commander who had studied every aspect of warfare and was about to demonstrate why humanity had earned the right to walk among the stars through conquest and blood. The first phase of the Vorthak assault began exactly 1 hour after the ultimatum expired. War Prime Vexkar watched from his command vessel as waves of his elite warriors swept across the Crimson Desert toward the human settlement. The Crimson Claw Battalion moved in perfect formation, their bio-enhanced limbs carrying them across the sandy terrain at inhuman speeds through his tactical visor. Vexkar observed the human defensive positions. They seemed almost primitive compared to the sophisticated fortress worlds the Empire usually conquered. Simple earthwork barriers, basic energy shields, and what appeared to be hastily constructed bunkers. The War Prime allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Perhaps the human female's bravado had been nothing more than desperate bluffing. The first line of Vorthak shock troops reached the outer perimeter of the human defenses without encountering any resistance. Too easy, Vexkar thought, but he pushed the concern aside. Perhaps the humans had simply realized the futility of their situation and abandoned their positions. That's when the ground exploded. The first indication that something was wrong came as a series of massive detonations erupted beneath the advancing Vorthek forces. The aliens had sophisticated sensors, but they had been calibrated to detect energy weapons and traditional explosives. They weren't designed to identify the carbon-based chemical compounds that humans had been perfecting for centuries. Hundreds of Vorthik warriors disappeared in clouds of fire and sand as buried charges detonated in carefully planned sequences. The explosions weren't random. They were precisely timed to funnel the surviving attackers into predetermined kill zones where concealed human positions could maximize their firepower. What is this? Vexkar snarled as his tactical display showed massive casualties among his forward units. Where are these explosives coming from? His chief intelligence officer, Sub-Commander Grexan, frantically worked at his console. War Prime, our sensors show no evidence of traditional mining or explosive placement. It's as if the very ground itself has been weaponized. What the Vorthak didn't understand was that humans had spent centuries learning how to turn any environment into a weapon. Commander Sheen's engineers had spent weeks laying a complex network of improvised, explosive devices using materials as mundane as fertilizer and fuel. Every approach to the colony had been carefully analyzed and prepared. The humans hadn't just built defenses. They had turned the entire battlefield into a trap. The second wave of Vorthak warriors advanced more cautiously, using their enhanced senses to detect potential threats. This time, they were ready for buried explosives. What they weren't ready for was the psychological warfare that followed. Hidden speakers placed throughout the desert began broadcasting a sound that made the Vorthak freeze in terror. It was a human war cry, but not just any war cry. Chun had ordered her technical staff to research the most psychologically disturbing sounds in human military history. What echoed across the battlefield was a composite of Viking berserker screams, Apache war whoops, Celtic battle cries, and the terrifying shouts of charging Mongol horsemen. The effect on the Vorthak was immediate and devastating. Their species had evolved as ambush predators, relying on stealth and sudden overwhelming force. The idea of enemies who announced their presence with such aggressive confidence triggered deep-seated evolutionary fears. Many of the alien warriors hesitated, their formation beginning to break down. That hesitation cost them dearly. The humans had learned something crucial about Vorthak biology from previous skirmishes. The aliens' enhanced reflexes and armored exoskeletons made them nearly invulnerable to conventional weapons. But they had one significant weakness. Their compound eyes were sensitive to specific light frequencies. Human engineers had modified standard mining lasers to emit precisely those frequencies. Brilliant strobing lights suddenly blazed from concealed positions throughout the battlefield. The effect on the Vorthak was like staring directly into a supernova. Their sophisticated visual systems overloaded instantly, leaving hundreds of elite warriors blind and disoriented. It was then that the real killing began. Human snipers, positioned in camouflaged hides that had been prepared weeks in advance, began picking off the blinded aliens with ruthless efficiency. But these weren't ordinary sniper rifles. Chion's weapons specialists had analyzed captured Vorthak equipment and discovered that their armor had a specific vulnerability at the joint between the thorax and abdomen. The humans had modified their weapons to fire armor-piercing rounds designed specifically to exploit this weakness. Each shot was carefully calculated, precisely aimed, and absolutely lethal. The Vorthak, who had expected to face primitive human technology, found themselves being systematically eliminated by weapons that seemed specifically designed to kill them. War Prime. Dexkar watched in growing horror as his casualty reports continued to climb. In less than 2 hours of fighting, he had lost nearly 30% of his forward assault force. The humans hadn't just resisted. They had turned the battlefield into an abattoir. "Sub-Commander," he barked, "launch the aerial assault. We'll bypass their ground defenses entirely." Grexan hesitated. "War Prime, our atmospheric reconnaissance shows no evidence of human air defense systems. It seems almost too convenient. Execute the order." Dexkar snarled. "I want those humans eliminated now." The Vorthak aerial fleet launched from the command ships, sleek atmospheric fighters designed for close air support. As they descended toward the human colony, their pilots felt confident that they would finally break the deadlock. The humans might have been clever with their ground defenses, but surely they couldn't have prepared for aerial warfare. They were wrong again. As the Vorthak fighters entered the colony's airspace, they encountered something that no alien species had ever developed. Surface-to-air missiles guided by artificial intelligence systems that had been perfecting aerial combat for over a century. The missiles didn't just track their targets. They predicted flight paths, calculated evasive maneuvers, and adjusted their own trajectories in real time. More importantly, the humans had learned from studying crashed Vorthak technology. The alien fighters relied on energy shields that were incredibly effective against energy weapons, but completely useless against kinetic projectiles traveling at hypersonic speeds. The sky above New Terra suddenly filled with contrails as dozens of missiles streaked upward. The Vorthek pilots, who had expected to face primitive projectile weapons, watched in shock as sophisticated guidance systems locked onto their aircraft with deadly precision. The first fighter exploded in a ball of plasma and twisted metal. Then another. And another. Within minutes, the entire aerial assault had been reduced to burning wreckage scattered across the desert from her command post. Commander Chun watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. The Vorthek had made the same mistake that countless enemies throughout human history had made. They had underestimated their opponent. Status report, she ordered. Enemy losses at 38% and climbing, Lieutenant Santos reported. Our casualties are minimal. 16 wounded, no fatalities. Chun nodded. The battle was far from over, but the first phase had gone exactly according to plan. The Vorthek Empire was about to learn a lesson that would echo throughout the galaxy. Humanity didn't just fight wars. They perfected them. War Prime Nexkar's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation among his species. The holographic casualty reports floating before him painted a picture that contradicted everything he had learned about warfare in his century of conquest. His elite Crimson Claw battalion, the terror of 17 worlds, was being systematically dismantled by a force less than 1/20th their size. "This is impossible," he growled, his forearms gesticulating wildly. "Humans are supposed to be a primitive species. How are they anticipating our every move?" Sub-Commander Grexen pulled up tactical analyses on his display. "War Prime, their defensive strategy appears to be based on something our databases have no reference for. They're not just reacting to our attacks. They're several steps ahead of us. It's as if they've fought this exact battle before." What the Vorthek didn't understand was that humans had indeed fought this battle before, thousands of times, in hundreds of different variations across their bloody history. Every human military academy studied the defense of Thermopylae, the siege of Stalingrad, the battles of Gettysburg and Normandy. Commander Chun hadn't just prepared for one specific enemy. She had prepared for war itself. The third phase of the Vorthek assault began with a more cautious approach. Nexkar ordered his remaining forces to advance using suppression, tactics developed against energy-based civilizations. Heavy plasma artillery bombarded the human positions for 3 hours, turning sand to glass and reducing several defensive structures to molten slag. The War Prime watched the bombardment with satisfaction. Surely no organic beings could survive such devastating firepower. When the artillery finally ceased, he ordered his ground forces to advance and occupy the ruins of the human colony. The Vorthek warriors moved across the glassed battlefield in tight formation, their sensors scanning for any signs of life. The human defenses appeared to have been completely obliterated. Victory seemed assured. That's when they discovered that humans had been building underground fortifications. For thousands of years, the first indication of trouble came when the ground beneath the advancing Vorthek suddenly gave way. What they had assumed were bomb craters from their artillery barrage were actually concealed entrances to an extensive tunnel network. Human soldiers emerged from hidden positions like demons rising from the underworld, their faces painted with primitive war markings that somehow made them more terrifying than any advanced armor could. But this wasn't just guerrilla warfare. This was something far more sophisticated and deadly. The humans had studied Vorthek movement patterns during the first 2 waves of attacks. They knew exactly how fast the aliens could move, how they reacted to threats, and most importantly, how they thought. The tunnel network wasn't random. It was designed to exploit every weakness in Vorthek tactical doctrine. Human soldiers appeared behind the alien forces, cutting off retreat routes. Others emerged on their flanks, creating crossfires that turned the battlefield into a killing field. But the most devastating aspect was the psychological element. The humans fought with a ferocity that defied comprehension, using tactics that seemed to border on insanity but were actually the product of millennia of military evolution. Sergeant Maria Santos, Lieutenant Santos's sister and leader of the underground assault teams, exemplified this human approach to warfare. She had been a Special Forces operative before joining the colonial mission, trained in combat techniques that incorporated elements from every major military tradition on Earth. As she led her team through the tunnels, she was simultaneously executing strategies learned from ancient Roman legions, Vietnamese guerrilla fighters, and modern urban warfare specialists. The Vorthak had advanced sensors and enhanced reflexes, but they had never encountered an enemy that could adapt their fighting style mid-battle. Human soldiers would engage them with conventional weapons until the aliens adjusted their defenses, then suddenly switched to tactics that rendered those defenses useless. "Contact front!" shouted Corporal Williams as a group of Vorthak warriors rounded a corner in the tunnel system. Instead of engaging in direct combat, his team immediately fell back while activating concealed flamethrowers that turned the tunnel into an inferno. The aliens' chitinous armor, which was nearly impervious to energy weapons, conducted heat with devastating efficiency. The screams that echoed through the underground network were unlike anything in Vorthak experience. They had conquered worlds through technological superiority and overwhelming force, but they had never faced an enemy that turned the environment itself into a weapon. Every corridor, every chamber, every intersection had been designed to maximize human advantages while neutralizing alien strengths. Above ground, War Prime Nexcar received increasingly desperate reports from his field commanders. "War Prime, we cannot maintain formation. The humans appear and disappear like phantoms. Our tactical algorithms cannot predict their movements." "Use the heavy assault units," Nexcar ordered. "Deploy the Titan-class warriors. No primitive species can stand against our bioengineered giants." The Titan-class Vorthak were the Empire's ultimate weapon, each one standing 4 meters tall and weighing nearly half a ton. Their exoskeletons had been enhanced with synthetic diamond plating, and their strength was sufficient to tear through armored vehicles. They had never been defeated in conventional warfare. As the massive alien warriors advanced toward the human positions, Commander Qian observed their approach with interest rather than fear. Humanity had faced giants before, from the war elephants of ancient armies to the super-heavy tanks of the 20th century. The solution was always the same: find the weakness and exploit it ruthlessly. "Implement giant killer protocols," she ordered. The human response was swift and coordinated. Instead of engaging the Titan-class warriors directly, human teams began targeting the ground beneath their feet. Carefully placed charges collapsed sections of the glass terrain, sending the massive aliens tumbling into pit traps lined with sharpened metal spikes. Those that avoided the pits found themselves caught in nets made from high-tensile cable, while human soldiers armed with cutting torches systematically dismantled their armor at the joints. But the most effective weapon against the giants was purely psychological. Human soldiers began using audio equipment to broadcast the sounds of construction machinery, jackhammers, chainsaws, and industrial grinders. To the Vorthak, who had never encountered such sounds, the noise suggested weapons of unimaginable destructive power. Several of the Titan-class warriors actually fled rather than face whatever hellish devices the humans possessed. As the third wave of the assault collapsed into chaos, Nexcar found himself facing a reality that contradicted everything the Empire knew about warfare. The humans weren't just winning. They were demonstrating a mastery of combat that surpassed anything in Vorthak experience. "Sub-Commander," he said, his voice hollow with defeat, "prepare the orbital bombardment platforms. If we cannot take this world through conventional warfare, we'll destroy it entirely." Grexan hesitated. "War Prime orbital bombardment will render the planet uninhabitable." "The Empire's colonization plans?" "The Empire's plans are irrelevant if we cannot defeat these humans," Nexcar snarled. "Send the message to the fleet. I want every bombardment platform targeting the human colony. We'll turn this entire continent to molten rock." As the order went out to the Vorthak fleet, Commander Chun received the intercepted communications through her electronic warfare specialists. She had been expecting this escalation. Throughout human history, Enemies who found themselves outmatched on the battlefield often resorted to indiscriminate destruction. She had prepared for this contingency as well. "Lieutenant Santos," she called out, "it's time to show them what humans really do when someone threatens to destroy their home." The Vorthak orbital bombardment fleet moved into position high above Kepler 442b, their massive weapons platforms bristling with enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. War Prime Thexkar stood in the command center of his flagship, watching the targeting displays with grim satisfaction. If he couldn't defeat the humans through conventional warfare, he would simply erase them from existence. "All bombardment platforms report ready," announced Sub-Commander Gregson. Targeting solutions locked on the human colony. Estimated time to complete planetary sterilization, 47 minutes. Thexkar's mandibles clicked once in acknowledgement. "Begin bombardment. I want nothing left alive on that world's surface." The first salvo of plasma cannons lit up the space around Kepler 442b like a miniature star. Massive bolts of superheated energy streaked toward the planet's surface, each one carrying enough destructive power to level a city. The War Prime watched with satisfaction as the energy readings indicated successful impacts across the target zone, but something was wrong. The expected secondary explosions and atmospheric disturbances weren't appearing on his sensors. Instead, the energy readings showed something impossible. The plasma bolts were being deflected. "Report." Thexkar barked. Gregson frantically worked at his console, his bioluminescent patterns flickering with confusion. "War Prime, our bombardment is being intercepted by some kind of defensive grid. But our preliminary scans showed no orbital defense platforms." What the Vorthak had missed was that humans had been thinking about planetary defense for decades, before they ever left their solar system. Commander Chin's engineers hadn't built orbital platforms because they didn't need them. They had built something far more elegant and deadly. A network of ground-based energy projectors using principles borrowed from Earth's most advanced particle accelerator research, the defensive grid that was. Deflecting the Vorthak bombardment wasn't just a shield. It was a weapon that turned the enemy's own firepower against them. Each plasma bolt that struck the deflector grid was absorbed, redirected, and amplified before being sent back toward its source. The humans had essentially turned the planet's surface into a massive mirror that reflected energy weapons with compound interest. The first sign that the Vorthak fleet was in trouble came when one of their bombardment platforms suddenly exploded. The reflected plasma bolt struck the ship's primary reactor, causing a chain reaction that tore the massive vessel apart from the inside. Thexkar watched in horror as wreckage rained down across space. "Impossible," he whispered. "How can a primitive species possess such advanced defensive technology?" The answer was that humans didn't just possess the technology. They had invented it specifically to counter orbital bombardment. Military theorists on Earth had spent centuries studying every possible form of space-based warfare, developing countermeasures for threats that didn't even exist yet. When humanity finally reached the stars, they brought with them solutions to problems they had only imagined. A second bombardment platform exploded, then a third. The deflector grid wasn't just protecting the human colony. It was systematically destroying the Vorthak fleet using their own weapons. Each reflected bolt was more powerful than the original, amplified by exotic matter generators that human physicists had developed in secret research facilities. But Commander Chin wasn't satisfied with defensive measures. As the Vorthak fleet reeled from the unexpected counterattack, she activated the next phase of her plan. Hidden launch silos across the planet's surface suddenly opened, revealing missiles that had been constructed from salvaged alien technology and human ingenuity. These weren't ordinary rockets. Human engineers had spent months reverse engineering captured Vorthak equipment, learning how their faster-than-light communication systems worked, how their energy shields operated, and most importantly, how their ship's navigation computers functioned. The missiles streaking toward the alien fleet carried warheads specifically designed to exploit weaknesses in Vorthak technology. The first missile to reach the fleet didn't explode on impact. Instead, it released a cloud of nanoscale machines that began infiltrating the flagship's computer systems. Within minutes, Vexcar found himself losing control of his own ship as human-designed viruses spread through the Vorthak network, turning their own systems against them. "Subcommander, what is happening to our systems?" Vexcar demanded as his tactical displays began showing false information and his weapon controls became unresponsive. "War Prime. We're being attacked by some kind of electronic warfare system," Grexan reported, his voice rising with panic. "Our computers are being rewritten in real time. It's as if the humans have turned our own technology into a weapon against us." That was exactly what had happened. Human cybersecurity experts had studied the Vorthak computer systems and discovered that they relied on quantum entanglement for faster-than-light data transmission. The aliens had assumed that such technology would be impossible for other species to comprehend, let alone counter. They hadn't anticipated that humans had been working with quantum computers for decades and had developed sophisticated electronic warfare capabilities. The virus spreading through the Vorthak fleet was unlike anything the Empire had ever encountered. It didn't just disrupt their systems. It learned from them, adapting and evolving as it spread from ship to ship. Within an hour, the entire bombardment fleet was effectively under human control, but Chain wasn't finished. The electronic warfare attack had given her access to the Vorthak fleet's communication systems, which meant she could now speak directly to every alien warrior in the battle group. Her voice, translated into their language, echoed through every ship's communication system. "War Prime Vexcar," she said, her tone conversational but carrying an undertone of absolute authority. "I believe you're beginning to understand why I suggested bringing more medics. Your casualties now exceed 70% of your original force, and you've lost effective control of your fleet." From this compromised command center, Vexcar could only listen in growing horror as the human female continued her psychological assault. "Your empire has conquered 17 peaceful civilizations using superior technology and overwhelming force. You've never faced an enemy that could match your technology and exceed your tactical capabilities. The Vorthak Empire has been fighting for conquest. Humans have been fighting for survival." The truth of her words was evident in the tactical displays that his own systems were now showing him. The human force of less than 5,000 colonists had effectively defeated a war fleet that had never known defeat. They hadn't just resisted. They had turned the Vorthak Empire's greatest strengths into weaknesses. "I'm going to make you an offer, War Prime," Chung continued. "One that I suggest you consider very carefully. You can order the immediate withdrawal of all Vorthak forces from this system and return to your empire with a message. Or you can continue this battle and discover what happens when humans stop fighting defensively and begin fighting to completely eliminate a threat." Car's 4 eyes widened as the implication of her words sank in. Everything they had experienced so far had been defensive warfare. The humans had been holding back, using only enough force to protect their colony. The idea that they possessed even more devastating capabilities was almost beyond comprehension. "What message would you have me deliver?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Chun's response carried across every communication channel in the fleet, ensuring that every Vorthak warrior heard her words clearly. "Tell your empire that humanity has claimed this region of space. Tell them that any further aggression will result in the complete destruction of the Vorthak species. And tell them that the next time they encounter humans in battle, they should bring significantly more medics." The silence that followed her words was deafening. For the first time in over a century of conquest, the Crimson Claw Battalion faced the possibility of total defeat at the hands of an enemy they had completely underestimated. The silence stretched across the Vorthak fleet like a physical presence, broken only by the steady hum of human-controlled ship systems and the occasional crackle of damaged electronics. War Prime Vexcar stared at his tactical displays, watching as his once mighty armada hung helpless in space. Their own technology turned against them by an enemy they had dismissed as primitive, but Vexcar had not survived a century of warfare by accepting defeat easily. His bioluminescent patches shifted to deep purple, signaling his transition into combat rage mode. If the humans thought they had won, they were about to discover why the Crimson Claw Battalion had never retreated from any battlefield. "Sub-Commander Grexon," he snarled. "Initiate Emergency Protocol Omega-7. All ships are to switch to backup systems and prepare for close-quarters boarding action." "War Prime, that protocol will mean sacrificing our technological advantages," Grexon protested. "We'll be fighting with nothing but our enhanced physiology and basic weapons." "Exactly," Bexkar replied, his mandibles clicking with anticipation. "These humans may have learned to counter our technology, but they cannot counter what we are. Vorthek warriors in hand-to-hand combat are undefeated across the galaxy. We will board their colony ships and settle this with claw and fang." What Bexkar didn't realize was that Commander June had been monitoring their communications through the compromised systems. She heard every word of the Vorthek plan and found herself genuinely surprised by the alien commander's tactical decision. It was perhaps the worst possible strategy he could have chosen. "Lieutenant Santos," she called out, "patch me through to all defensive positions. The Vorthek are about to attempt boarding actions. Implement close-quarters combat protocols immediately." Santos looked puzzled. "Ma'am, with respect, why would they choose to engage us in personal combat? That eliminates every advantage they have." Chun's smile was predatory. "Because War Prime Bexkar just made the same mistake every enemy in human history has made when they're desperate. He's about to discover that humans didn't reach the top of their food chain through technology. We got there by being better killers than anything else that walked on two legs." Across the planet's surface, human soldiers received their new orders and began preparations for close-quarters combat. But this wasn't the panicked scrambling of a desperate defense. These were professionals who had been trained in combat techniques that had been refined through thousands of years of human warfare. The first Vorthek boarding shuttles launched from the crippled fleet, their primitive backup systems immune to human electronic warfare. As they descended toward the human colony, their warriors prepared for the kind of brutal personal combat that had made their species the terror of 17 worlds. The shuttles crashed into the desert sand around New Terra, disgorging hundreds of Vorthek warriors equipped with nothing but their natural weapons and basic energy shields. These were the Empire's finest close combat specialists, each one capable of tearing apart a dozen ordinary enemies with their enhanced claws and biomechanical strength. They advanced on the human positions with confidence born of genetic superiority. Vorthek warriors were faster, stronger, and more durable than any species they had previously encountered. Their exoskeletons provided natural armor, while their forearms gave them significant advantages in hand-to-hand combat. The first group of aliens reached the outer perimeter of the human defenses and found themselves face-to-face with Sergeant Maria Santos and her special operations team. The Vorthek warriors activated their energy shields and charged, expecting to overwhelm the smaller human defenders through sheer physical dominance. Instead, they encountered something that no Vorthek had ever faced before: humans who had been systematically trained to kill larger, stronger opponents. Maria Santos had been studying martial arts since childhood, eventually mastering combat systems from 6 different continents. But more importantly, she had been trained by instructors who understood that humans had survived as a species by being smarter, not stronger, than their natural predators. Every human combat technique was designed around the principle of using an opponent's size and strength against them. The first Vorthek warrior to reach her position stood nearly 3 meters tall and weighed twice as much as any human. Its forearms ended in claws that could shred metal, and its chitinous armor had deflected energy weapons. It was the perfect killing machine, evolved for dominance through physical superiority. Santos dropped low and struck the alien's left knee joint with a precisely aimed blow from a combat knife. The blade was made from tungsten carbide and had been designed specifically to penetrate Vorthek exoskeleton at its weakest points. The warrior stumbled, its enhanced reflexes useless against an attack that exploited biomechanical vulnerabilities it had never encountered before the alien could recover. Santos drove her elbow into its throat, crushing the softer tissue beneath its armored head. As the creature fell, she was already moving toward the next target, her movements flowing like a deadly dance that had been choreographed over millennia of human evolution. The pattern repeated across the battlefield as human soldiers engaged the Vorthek in personal combat. The aliens had expected to face terrified colonists armed with primitive weapons. Instead, they encountered warriors who fought with a precision and savagery that defied their smaller size. Corporal Williams had been a boxer before joining the colonial mission, but his military training had taught him how to apply those skills against non-human opponents. When a massive Vorthek warrior charged him, swinging all four arms in a devastating attack pattern, Williams simply wasn't where the alien expected him to be. Human soldiers had been trained to fight against computer simulations of Vorthek anatomy, learning to recognize the split-second hesitations that occurred when the aliens had to coordinate their multiple limbs. Williams slipped inside the creature's guard and delivered a series of rapid strikes to nerve clusters that human xenobiologists had identified as critical vulnerabilities. The Vorthek warrior collapsed, its enhanced nervous system overloaded by precisely targeted attacks that its species had no defense against. But the most devastating aspect of human close-quarters combat wasn't individual skill. It was coordination. While the Vorthek fought as individual warriors seeking personal glory, the humans fought as a unified force that had been training together for months. They moved in patterns that allowed them to support each other, creating overlapping fields of fire and mutual protection that maximized their effectiveness while minimizing their vulnerabilities. Private Chun, the commander's nephew, had been a knife-fighting instructor in Earth Special Forces. As three Vorthek warriors converged on his position, he didn't try to engage them individually. Instead, he used smoke grenades and carefully placed obstacles to force the aliens into a narrow corridor, where only one could attack at a time. Then he systematically dismantled them using techniques that had been developed for fighting in urban environments, against overwhelming odds, from his shuttle's command position. Dexkar watched in growing horror as his elite warriors were systematically destroyed by an enemy that should have been physically inferior in every way. The casualty reports flooding his communications system painted a picture that contradicted everything the Empire knew about combat. "This is impossible," he whispered. "Our warriors are genetically superior. How are these humans defeating us in personal combat?" Sub-Commander Gregson, monitoring the battle through backup sensors, provided an answer that chilled Dexkar to his core. "War Prime, the humans aren't fighting like any species we've previously encountered. They're not trying to match our strength or speed. They're fighting like predators who have spent their entire evolutionary history learning how to kill things larger and more dangerous than themselves." As the battle raged across the desert, it became clear that the Vorthek Empire had made a fundamental miscalculation. They had assumed that physical superiority would translate to combat dominance, but they had never faced an enemy that had turned warfare into an exact science. Every human fighting technique had been tested in real combat against every conceivable type of opponent, refined through trial and error over thousands of years of continuous conflict. The humans weren't just defending their colony. They were demonstrating why their species had conquered an entire planet before ever leaving it. The crimson sand of Kepler 442b was now stained with the bioluminescent fluid that served as Vorthek blood, creating an eerie rainbow of colors across the battlefield. War Prime Dexkar stood among the wreckage of his boarding shuttles, his once magnificent armor scarred and dented from the fighting. Around him, the remnants of his elite Crimson Claw battalion gathered in defensive positions. Their confidence shattered by an enemy they still couldn't fully comprehend. The casualties were beyond anything in Vorthek military history. Of the 300,000 warriors who had begun the assault, fewer than 50,000 remained combat effective. The humans, meanwhile, had suffered minimal losses while inflicting devastating damage on what was supposedly the most formidable military force in the galaxy. War Prime, Sub-Commander Gregson approached cautiously, his bioluminescent patches flickering with barely controlled panic. We're receiving communications from the surviving ship commanders. They're requesting permission to withdraw from the system. Dexcar's mandibles clicked in anger. Withdraw? The Crimson Claw Battalion has never withdrawn from any battlefield. We do not retreat. With respect, War Prime, Gregson replied, we have never faced an enemy like this before. These humans fight with a sophistication that surpasses our own tactical doctrines. They're not just winning. They're making us look like primitive savages. Before Dexcar could respond, a new voice cut across their communication channel. Commander Chin's voice, calm and professional, addressed the alien commander directly. War Prime Dexcar, I'm offering you one final opportunity to end this conflict before it escalates beyond your ability to control. You have 10 minutes to begin evacuating your surviving forces from this system. After that time expires, I will demonstrate why humans are considered the most dangerous predatory species in this region of the galaxy. Dexcar activated his personal communicator, his 4 eyes burning with rage. Human female, you may have defeated my advance forces through trickery and deception, but the Vorthic Empire will not be intimidated by your threats. We have resources you cannot imagine. War Prime, Shang replied, and for the first time, Dexcar detected a note of something that chilled him more than anger or hatred. It was pity. You still don't understand what you're facing. Let me explain something about human military doctrine that might help you make a more informed decision. The communication channel remained open as Chun continued, her words carrying to every Vorthic warrior on the planet's surface. The Vorthic Empire has been conquering peaceful civilizations for over a century. Every species you've encountered has been primarily focused on science, philosophy, or trade. They fought you defensively, trying to protect their homes and families. You've never encountered a species that makes war its primary focus. From his command bunker, Chun called up a holographic display that showed the tactical situation across the entire star system. What she revealed sent a shock of terror through every Vorthic who could see it. Your intelligence reports were correct about one thing, she continued. This is a small colonial outpost with minimal military resources. What your reports missed is that this colony was established by the Terran Colonial Defense Force, which means that every single person on this planet is a military veteran. We didn't come here to farm or mine or establish trade routes. We came here to create humanity's first fortified position beyond our solar system. The holographic display showed the true scope of the human preparations. What the Vorthic had assumed was a hastily constructed settlement was actually a sophisticated, military installation designed to withstand exactly the kind of assault they had launched. Every building, every tunnel, every defensive position had been planned and constructed by engineers who had studied galactic warfare for decades. But more importantly, Chun continued, you forced me to activate protocols that I had hoped never to use. You see, War Prime, what you've been fighting so far has been purely defensive warfare. Human soldiers protecting their homes and families. You're about to discover what happens when humans shift from defense to offense. As if summoned by her words, new contacts began appearing on Vorthac sensors throughout the system. Ships were dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the star system, but these weren't colonial vessels or merchant craft. These were warships, their signatures clearly marking them as military vessels of the Terran Space Navy. Dexcar stared at the tactical display in growing horror. Impossible. Our intelligence indicated that humans had no significant military presence in this region. Your intelligence was wrong, Chun replied. The moment you began your assault on this colony, automated signals were transmitted to every human military installation within 50 light years. What you're seeing now is the response of a species that has learned never to fight alone. The approaching human fleet was unlike anything the Vorthac had ever encountered. Each ship had been designed not just for warfare, but for the specific purpose of eliminating technologically advanced opponents. Human military engineers had spent decades analyzing every known alien technology, developing weapons and defenses specifically tailored to counter each potential threat. But the most terrifying aspect wasn't the ships themselves. It was what they represented. The Vorthek Empire conquered through overwhelming technological superiority and individual warrior prowess. Humanity had developed a completely different approach to warfare, systematic, coordinated, and absolutely ruthless elimination of threats. Admiral Harrison, this is Commander Chun, the human officer's voice carried across the communication channels. Sitrip on Colonial Defense Operations. Chun, this is Admiral Harrison aboard the TNS Retribution. We have 47 ships of the line and complete tactical superiority throughout the system. Your orders regarding the Vorthek survivors? For a moment, the communication channel was silent except for the background hum of electronic equipment. When Chun finally responded, her voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Admiral, the Vorthek Empire has demonstrated hostile intent toward human colonial territories. They have ignored diplomatic warnings and proceeded with military aggression against civilian populations. Rules of engagement are weapons-free. You are authorized to eliminate any vessel that does not immediately begin withdrawal from human space. Vexkar found himself facing a reality that no Vorthek commander had ever confronted. Not only had his supposedly invincible force been defeated by a small colonial garrison, but he was now facing the prospect of fighting an entire human military fleet designed specifically for ship-to-ship combat. War Prime, Grexon's voice was barely a whisper. Our remaining ships cannot survive engagement with that fleet. Our weapons are designed for orbital bombardment, not fleet actions against military vessels. For the first time in his long career, Vexkar was forced to consider the possibility of surrender. The Crimson Claw Battalion had never retreated, but they had also never faced complete annihilation by an enemy that understood warfare better than they did. Commander Chun, he said, his voice heavy with defeat, what terms would you offer for the withdrawal of our forces? Chun's response was swift and non-negotiable. Immediate evacuation of all Vorthek personnel from this system. Transmission of complete intelligence files regarding Empire military capabilities and territorial claims. And most importantly, delivery of a message to your government that any further aggression toward human space will result in the complete destruction of the Vorthek Empire. The truth of her words was evident in the tactical displays surrounding him. The approaching human fleet represented more firepower than the Vorthek Empire could deploy in their entire military. Humanity hadn't just won this battle. They had demonstrated that they possessed the capability to project force across interstellar distances with devastating efficiency. Vexkar made the hardest decision of his military career. We accept your terms, Commander Chun. The Crimson Claw Battalion will withdraw immediately. As evacuation shuttles began lifting off from the planet's surface, carrying the shattered remains of what had once been the Empire's most elite fighting force, Vexkar realized that the galaxy had just changed forever. Humanity had announced their presence among the stars not as explorers or traders, but as warriors who would not tolerate threats to their people. 3 months after the Battle of New Terra, the consequences of humanity's victory rippled across the galaxy like shock waves from a cosmic explosion. The Vorthek Empire, which had dominated this region of space for over a century, found itself struggling to maintain control over territories that had once been firmly under their rule. In the imperial capital of Vorth Prime, Emperor Catherine stood before the assembled high command, his bioluminescent patterns dim with shame and confusion. The holographic displays surrounding him showed a galaxy that no longer recognized Vorthek supremacy. 17 conquered worlds had declared independence in the wake of news about the Crimson Claw Battalion's defeat. Trade routes that had funneled wealth to the Empire for generations had been severed as former client species began forming their own alliances. How? The Emperor asked, his voice barely a whisper. How did a single human colony destroy our most elite military force? War Prime Vexkar, his once magnificent armor replaced by the simple robes of a defeated commander, stood before the assembly to deliver his report. The shame of defeat burned through his system like acid. But he had learned something that the Empire needed to understand if they were going to survive in a galaxy that now contained humanity. "Your Imperial Majesty," he began. "The humans are unlike any species we have previously encountered. They do not fight for conquest or dominance. They fight for survival, and they have spent their entire evolutionary history perfecting the art of warfare." The assembled commanders shifted uncomfortably as Thexkar continued his report. "Every aspect of their military doctrine is designed around one principle: the complete elimination of threats to their people. They do not seek to minimize casualties or preserve resources. When humans fight, they fight to win absolutely, regardless of cost." Emperor Catherine's mandibles clicked impatiently. "You're telling me that a species with inferior technology and smaller numbers defeated our forces through superior tactics?" "No, Your Majesty," Thexkar replied, his bioluminescent patterns shifting to deep blue in acknowledgement of hard truth. "I'm telling you that we encountered a species that has weaponized their entire culture around the concept of warfare. Every human civilian is a potential soldier. Every human settlement is a potential fortress. Every human ship is a potential weapon platform. The War Prime activated a holographic display that showed intercepted human communications from across their colonial territories. Since our defeat at New Terra, we have monitored human expansion activities throughout this sector. They are not establishing trade colonies or research stations. They are building military outposts designed to project force across interstellar distances. What the Vorthak were witnessing was humanity's true expansion strategy. Each colony was carefully positioned to provide mutual support with neighboring settlements, creating an interlocking network of defensive positions that could rapidly transform into offensive bases. Human engineers had learned from studying galactic history, analyzing every major interstellar conflict to understand how civilizations fell and how they could be defended. Furthermore, Thexkar continued, our intelligence indicates that the force we encountered at New Terra represented less than 1% of total human military capability. The Colonial Defense Force is separate from their primary military, which remains concentrated around their home system. This revelation sent shock waves through the assembled Vorthak commanders. If a tiny colonial garrison could destroy their most elite battle group, what would happen if they faced the full might of human military power? Meanwhile, on New Terra, Commander Chun stood in her rebuilt command center, reviewing intelligence reports from across human space. The victory over the Vorthak had accomplished exactly what she had intended. It had announced humanity's presence in the galaxy and established their reputation as a force that should not be challenged. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Santos reported, "we're receiving diplomatic communications from 47 different species. Most are requesting trade agreements or defensive alliances. Several are offering intelligence about potential threats in their regions of space." Chun nodded with satisfaction. This was how human expansion was supposed to work. Instead of conquering territory through force like the Vorthak, humans would establish themselves as the protectors of peaceful species who wanted to be left alone to pursue science, philosophy, and trade. In return, humanity would gain access to resources, technology, and strategic positions throughout the galaxy. "Any word from Earth Command about our next phase of expansion?" she asked. Santos consulted his tactical display. "Admiral Harrison's fleet has established permanent patrol routes throughout this sector. Earth Command is dispatching 3 additional colonial defense groups to establish footholds in adjacent systems. The Admiralty wants to create a buffer zone of at least 20 systems around human space." The strategy was working perfectly. Humanity was expanding not through conquest but through the establishment of mutual defense agreements with species who had been terrorized by empires like the Vorthak. Each new alliance brought additional resources, intelligence, and strategic positions that strengthened humanity's overall defensive capabilities. But perhaps the most significant development was taking place in the research labs of Earth's military institutions. Human scientists were analyzing captured Vorthek technology, not to copy it, but to understand its weaknesses and develop countermeasures. Every piece of alien equipment provided insights into the technological approaches used by different species, allowing human engineers to design weapons and defenses, specifically tailored to counter potential threats. Dr. Sarah Williams, leading the Xenotechnology Research Program, had reached a startling conclusion about galactic warfare. Most species develop technology for peaceful purposes and then adapt it for military use when necessary, she reported to the Defense Council. Humans are the only species we've encountered that deliberately develops military technology and then adapts it for peaceful purposes. This gives us a fundamental advantage in any conflict. The implications were staggering. While other species struggled to militarize their peaceful technologies when faced with threats, humans had spent millennia perfecting weapons and then finding peaceful applications for those innovations. Nuclear technology, developed for warfare, became the foundation for interstellar travel. Computer systems, designed for military applications, became the basis for all human technology. Even their medical advances were often derived from military research into trauma, treatment, and biological warfare defense. Back on Vorth Prime, Emperor Kethran was forced to make a decision that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. The Vorthic Empire, which had dominated 17 worlds through military superiority, was now negotiating from a position of weakness. Send an official communication to the human colonial government, he ordered. Inform them that the Vorthic Empire formally recognizes human territorial claims and requests the establishment of diplomatic relations. The message that went out to human space was more than just a diplomatic overture. It was an acknowledgement that the galaxy's balance of power had fundamentally shifted. The age of conquest through technological superiority was ending, replaced by something far more complex and dangerous. Commander Chun received the Vorthak communication while reviewing tactical plans for humanity's continued expansion. She read the formal diplomatic language with amusement, recognizing it for what it truly was, a surrender disguised as diplomacy. Lieutenant Santos, she called out, draft a response to the Vorthak Empire. Inform them that humanity is willing to establish diplomatic relations provided they agree to several conditions. As Santos prepared the response, Chun reflected on how much the galaxy had changed since that first day, when War Prime Lexkar had demanded their surrender. Humanity had announced their presence among the stars not as conquerors or explorers, but as the ultimate expression of a species. That had turned warfare into an art form. The final message that went out to the Vorthak Empire contained terms that effectively neutered their ability to threaten any peaceful species ever again. But it also contained an offer that demonstrated humanity's true strategic vision: partnership with any species willing to contribute to galactic peace and stability. The galaxy was about to discover that humans didn't just fight wars better than anyone else. They also built civilizations designed to prevent wars from becoming necessary. And for any species that chose aggression over cooperation, humanity had demonstrated that they were prepared to respond with overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. The age of human expansion had begun, and it would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen.